Shakespeare Suppressed, the uncensored truth about Shakespeare and his works, tonight with my guest, Katherine Chiljan. She's an independent scholar who has studied the Shakespeare authorship question for over 28 years. She's a graduate of UCLA with a bachelor's in history, and she became interested in the controversy when Charlton Ogburn, author of The Mysterious William Shakespeare, appeared in a TV debate with a Shakespeare professor. She then started doing her own research, eventually publishing two anthologies, about the 17th Earl of Oxford and acting as editor of the Shakespeare Oxford newsletter. In 2003, she debated English professors on the topic at the Smithsonian Institution, and tonight she's going to be joining us to discuss the controversy, give us some of the parameters of her work, share her work with us, and some of the things that she has found. And in preparing for tonight's show, I was looking through some of her research and her work and researching a little bit online, and it was pretty fascinating, some of the things that have come up, and most people don't usually think about this topic or even question it. So tune in tonight, see where this takes us, and if you have any questions or comments, you can send it to me right here on the InQuick message board, and we'll be happy to take your questions on the air. Welcome, Katherine. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Wow, what a big topic. So what's your story? How did you get into all of this? I mean, I gave a little bit of that in your bio as I read it to the audience, but I mean, something must have picked up your passion and said, for 28 years, I'm going to focus on this. Tell me about that.
Well, I first became exposed to there being a question about the identity of Shakespeare when I was in high school. And my English teacher said, some people think Shakespeare was Marlowe. And that's all she said, and she didn't get into it, but I thought that was intriguing. And then I saw on television, I saw a debate between a Princeton professor who thinks that everything is fine about Shakespeare, that there's no controversy at all, and he was debating Charlton Ogburn, who you mentioned in your introduction. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Mysterious William Shakespeare. And he was saying that William Shakespeare is a pen name, and that it was for the Earl of Oxford, and who was a nobleman. His name was Edward de Vere, but his title was Earl of Oxford. So all I saw was Charlton Ogburn making wonderful point after point after point for the Earl of Oxford, and the Princeton professor, he was supposed to be supporting the man from Stratford-on-Avon, who we all believe wrote the work, supposedly, and he couldn't make any point at all. He couldn't give any facts to support his case, so it really looked like a lopsided argument. And adding to that, I first read Hamlet when I was 21, not for a class, just on my own. And I was looking in the introductory pages of this work, and they gave a chronology of all the plays when they were dated and the order. And yet there was something funny about it. There were question marks after every play, like Comedy of Errors, question mark, 1595. Merchant of Venice, question mark, 1600, for example. I thought to myself, gee, after at least 200 years of research, they still don't know when Hamlet was written, for example. It's all a question mark. And so you have that combination of they don't know anything, and then watching that debate, and I thought to myself, I'm going to, read this man's book and get into it and, look into it more. And all you have to do is read one or two chapters of his book and you're convinced that the Earl of Oxford was the great author. I mean, it's so overwhelming. And then as I did get into it and I started to meet people who believed like I did, I noticed that they were all many, many years older than me. I was in my early 20s and they averaged 60, 70, 80. And they were a very small group. So that kind of made me feel, in a way, a little bit responsible that I have to help, carry it on, with other people of my generation. And so that sort of really ignited my interest. And also, for some reason, I just wanted to tell everybody about it. And Right now, I feel it in my face. I'm getting all passionate about it. So,
well, it sounds like you and I have something in common. We look for the truth, and when we find something that doesn't quite feel truthful, it starts this chemical process in our brain, and we begin to say,
yes.
"Oh my gosh, I have to figure this out," and we go and go and go and dig and dig and dig until we find it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show, because I connected to you as a researcher in that sense and a truth hunter. So I needed to share that with you. But so we have this great book that, pretty much everybody on the planet, for the most part, has read at some point in their academic lifetime careers or have at least heard of. And why do you think it's such a big deal to admit that this is a pen name? Or why, I guess my first question in just listening to you talk would be, why would somebody go to so much trouble to not, share their identity and take on this kind of, this a dangerous thing to write plays or the material in there? So that's my first thought. So where would you go if somebody said, well, why? Why would they even bother to make it such a mystery?
Yes, that's an excellent question. The reason why, we don't know the 100% reason why, but the main reason why is that if you are of the nobility, and he was, during that time period, any association with writing poetry or writing plays or things like that, that was considered frivolous. It was not something that a nobleman should be doing. A nobleman should be serving the Queen. This is the era of Queen Elizabeth I. We're talking 16th century. And nobility should be either a minister or should be, a leader in the war, in some sort of war capacity, military capacity, or serving the Queen in some high manner, not hanging around the theater and writing plays. And so to protect the family name, he didn't tell people that he was writing these works. Also, it's very important to know that after looking into this, the plays were really initially written for the Queen and her courtiers. First, keep in mind that the Queen did not go to a public theater. She had her own private, little area where she would be entertained with plays and masks and things like that. And so
in some way, he was teaching. The plays were giving her a kind of exposure to, a muse or an inspiration. Would that be fair to say as part of an intention, then, whoever wrote this?
Yes, she loved plays, and we know that she sponsored some. She sponsored an acting company, and I believe a children's company, and we know that she paid another dramatist, John Lilly. We have correspondence between her and John Lilly. So she knew dramatists, and she liked her entertainment. But it was only later that these plays eventually got onto the public stage. And that's when there was a little bit more interest in who he was. But contemporaries were keeping it quiet. And I think because they knew he was a nobleman and they were respecting his wish. Now, that is during his lifetime. Okay? During one's lifetime, one does not kind of let on about this, and certainly does not publish. Because if you publish, it means that you need money. You need to write for money, and that's a very low class thing for somebody who's at the upper echelon of society. So, however, the one little hitch is, after one dies, it's okay. Once you're dead, your friends or your families would be fine to go ahead and publish your works with your name on it if you were of the nobility. But that is really the crux of the issue, is that the great author, who was a nobleman, did not get that courtesy. And the real question is, why? Why, when he died, no one said a word? There's something in the air at that point that's problematic. And because of that, that led to a mistake as to who he really was. Because meantime, there's another man named William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon. And the pen name William Shakespeare and the Stratford man, Shakespeare, their two identities got mixed up. And today we are celebrating the 400th anniversary this year of the Stratford man's death. But he was not the true author.
Wow. So
does that make sense?
yeah, it does. So who do you think, how do you think that mistake happened? I mean, in all your research and all your passion in looking into this, why do you think it was kept quiet that this Earl of Oxford wasn't given credit?
Yes, I think it was political. You have to read Shakespeare's sonnets in a certain light, where he seems to be praising a young man, but in royal terms, and as if he were a prince. And the only way you could have been royal back then would be as the Queen's child. And it seems to be that he's indicating that this young man, who most Shakespeare scholars believe was the Earl of Southampton, that he was the Queen's child. It seems to be that was the great author's point of view. Whether it was right or wrong, that was his point of view. And when these sonnets became published in 1609, I believe that created somewhat of a crisis for the current king who got the crown. It was King James of Scotland. It did not go to this fair youth, this young man that Shakespeare praised in the sonnets. I think it has something to do with that.
You think there was something going on between who was his inspiration really behind the actual work?
For the Shakespeare sonnets. So that's, not the plays, but I would say, because the sonnets were 154 poems, and they were mostly written in the first person, where he's really talking deeply about himself and the people that he loved. And there seems to be a very close connection between the fair youth that he describes and himself. But anyway, you have to... Was it like
a lover situation? Do you think maybe it was like a gay lover kind of situation where he was hiding it?
That is one theory that's been around since, a few decades. But I believe truly that it was a father and son relationship. That's the way I read it.
Okay.
But I mean, it's theoretical. And of course, what I just told you is theoretical. But in trying to understand why the authority did not allow the true author to get his due as the author of the greatest achievement in English literature, at least up until that point, you have to kind of go into the speculative realm. But as far as identifying the real author, contemporaries described him, and he was somebody who was very different from the Stratford man. And, we can get into that if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So outside of London, Stratford-upon-Avon has the greatest draw of tourists in England because it is known as the birthplace of the great author William Shakespeare. But you, Katherine, think that this is factually incorrect. Why?
It is because the man born in Stratford-on-Avon, his name was William Shakespeare. That's the way the name was phonetically spelled in the majority of cases, not like Shakespeare. There's no contemporary evidence, none during his lifetime, that connects him to writing. We have nothing in his handwriting at all, other than 6 signatures that were on legal documents. We have no evidence he went to school. There's no play manuscripts that have survived, or letters. We don't know what he looked like. We don't have an authentic image during his lifetime. We don't have payments to him as a writer, or as a playwright, or as an actor even. We don't have evidence that he was patronized. And when he died in 1616, nobody said a word. even his families and friends never mentioned, and neighbors mentioned, that he was a great author. So you just keep getting zero after zero after zero. I mean, there's nothing. And all the evidence that today's Shakespeare orthodoxy would tell you is after he died. So it appears to me that it was, this sort of myth was created after his death and after the great author's death. And it started in a publication in 1623 in a collection of the Shakespeare plays. It's 36 Shakespeare plays in one large book, and they call it today the First Folio. In fact, there is several tours of First Folio books happening right now in America. It's being showcased at various libraries because 2016 is supposedly the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, so they're doing some special things. And so in the opening pages of this First Folio book, you have commendatory letters to the great author. And in one of the poems, actually, is the word Stratford Monument. And on somebody else's poem on another page to Shakespeare is Avon, Sweet Swan of Avon. And so there is a monument in the Stratford upon Avon Church to a William Shakespeare. So, you put A and B together, it must be, the resting place of the great author. And so that's an assumption that started very early. But, this is 1623. But as early as 1640, someone published a book and made a picture of a similar picture as the one that appeared in the Folio book, the one that we all know. It's black and white engraving. And they made a similar one to that, and underneath it they wrote this line: "This picture is renowned Shakespeare." I think the word was figure. "This figure is renowned Shakespeare," or shadow, with a question mark. So that's very soon after this Folio book came out in print. So people were already doubting it. But things happened, and people died, and the truth got lost over time.
This is almost a 400-year myth that we're talking about breaking down, and so much invested into the structuring the story and who this person was into people's academia lifetimes. I mean, this is kind of such an odd, bizarre slip for me to grasp and wrap my mind around, because like you, I would think so many people would have asked the question, well, who is he? Who really, where did he really live? The reality of this man. But it seems that everybody just kind of, forgot him and just trusted what everybody said and didn't question anything. So it's kind of sad in some ways, because it makes me say, wow, people, we really don't question anything we're told. We just take it and, go with it. Well, so, nobody noticed he died. I mean, let's talk about his death. I mean, his birth record and death records. I mean, what about those?
That's really amazing. The Stratford man, he died in 1616, and there was not one word said. And yet this great author, William Shakespeare, was praised to the hilt during his lifetime, and his plays were very popular, and his poems were very popular, and they went through many editions while the Stratford man was alive. And when other poets and playwrights died, they had often the privilege of being buried in Westminster Abbey, a place where kings and queens are buried. And we have that with Edmund Spenser. He wrote The Faerie Queene. He died in 1599. We have it for Ben Jonson, who was also a playwright and poet. He died in, I believe, 1638, and then Michael Drayton in 1634. So, I would assume that most of your listeners weren't familiar with those authors, but Shakespeare was more famous than those authors, but why wasn't he buried in Westminster Abbey? Why didn't anyone note it? See, that's a great question mark. See, the problem is the merging of these two identities. There was a man named William Shakespeare who was involved with the theater, the Stratford man. He did get involved with the theater, but my research shows me that it was only as a financier, someone who was basically loaning money to the companies, to advancing them money, maybe perhaps to buy props or costumes or things like that, because they didn't get paid until sometimes a few months afterwards for the private performances. So he could very well have just been pretty much, a banker for acting companies. And also he was a theater shareholder. So, again, it's kind of the business end of the theater. But absolutely, 100%, there is no evidence during his lifetime that he was a writer. And that is a fact that the professors today, they don't seem to notice or care about.
Well, that's a whole other show, I think.
Yes.
I don't know. But I guess that my mind keeps asking the question, well, okay, so we have this strange thing, this enigma, this kind of mystery here. Well, what was again, I keep going back to the content. Is it something that was in the content, or was it more about the rank of the author and wanting to be secret? Or do you think it was both or neither? I mean,
well, let me give you an example.
Keep going back to the content and saying, well, was there something in the content that somewhere behind the scenes where people aren't looking could have been sensitive to the nature of perhaps an inheritance, or if this was a father-son type love story, or, devotion or inspiration in the sonnets, which I think poetry holds an energy, and it holds that love, and it holds that, and he wrote, like you said, very deep, powerful first-person type accounts. Would this possibly have exposed something on the other side of that maybe would have taken money away from somebody, or parental rights? I mean, is that kind of where you think it went?
No. Well, I believe it was political. I believe that the young man that he loved was actually a child of the Queen, and he was a potential successor to the throne. And I believe that he did not have the support. I think a certain powerful faction did not want this young man to succeed. And also it would totally disrupt the myth of the Virgin Queen. That's what
now we're getting somewhere. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so now how would that disrupt the Virgin Queen myth?
Well, it would mean that she was not a virgin.
I thought everybody assumed that.
Yes, but, she's a whole nother topic, that woman. She was not like a nun or a matronly style person. She was a very, woman with a temper, a woman who liked handsome men with long legs and who danced well. I mean, she would promote those people. The Earl of Oxford was one of them. He was also quite a handsome man. And whenever one of her courtiers got married without her permission, she would banish them. So, she was she just wasn't a sweet, virginish type of person. She got very jealous.
So would this be something then that she might not want to acknowledge the author because of like a broken heart type bad ending of a lovership type thing? Is that possible?
Something like it, but I think it's more her ego. I think, admitting that she really did have a child, actually probably children. I mean, this is speculation, of course. I can't give you proof on that.
Yeah, I know, but I love talking about it this way.
But she had a very close relationship with the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley. And it was known that whenever they went on progress, when the court went on progress to various country homes, their bedrooms would be right next to each other. And, I can't tell you the full history of that, but at one point...
It makes you wonder, because this woman obviously has an image of a virgin queen, and she's got the church to stand up to and her queendom, and she has a taste for lovers, and there's a little bit of drama going on in the background here. And so, you have kind of more of a soap opera story than you do maybe a love sonnet, but maybe the love sonnet was something that the real karma that comes into the controversy isn't so much about, who really was, well, maybe it is, but, who really was this man, William Shakespeare, as much as it was, why didn't she honor him the way she should have?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think a lot has to do with ego. But anyway, there's a lot that can be said as far as her, romances, which were rumored about. In fact, she and Robert Dudley, they had asked permission to marry from the Spanish ambassador, because at that time Spain was very powerful. So she got pretty close, at least, to getting married. But anyway, I don't want to get diverted.
So we kind of got off on that piece.
Yeah. So, but you were mentioning about politics or, sensitivity in the works. And for example, I give you in Hamlet, one of the characters is called Polonius, and Polonius is the king's counselor, the prime minister in essence. But many historians see that was actually a lampooning of a real man, Queen Elizabeth's prime minister, named Lord Burleigh. And he was the most powerful, next to the Queen, the most powerful man in England. And, it was not a flattering portrayal. He kind of was shown as somebody who was long-winded, and, he was not really very well portrayed there. And it's interesting because the first printed edition of Hamlet gave his name differently. He was called Corambus. And Corambus means one-hearted. And Lord Burleigh's motto was, Corambus means two-hearted, and Lord Burleigh's motto was one-hearted. So it seems to be, kind of a cynical portrayal of him and a cynical name. But in the second printed edition, the name was changed. So that shows you right off the bat there was some sensitivity going on. And also, for example, Richard III, he was kind of a king with kind of a diabolical character. And yet many people during this period saw Lord Burleigh's son, Robert Cecil, as like a Richard III, because he had a hunchback. They both had a hunchback. So people read that perhaps into the plays. So there are, and who else could portray him as well as somebody who knew him? And the Earl of Oxford, of course, knew him. He was raised, they were raised like brothers in the same household. So if the works were attributed to a man who was from a small town north of England, who had no connections to the court or the Queen, then no one's going to make that connection that, he's making fun of Lord Burleigh and his son, you see? So there are some political ramifications.
Yeah, just listening to it, it reminds you of some dramas going on in the world today. It's similar to this. Do you think it's a case of mistaken identity, or do you think somebody had a little more maliciousness to it, where it was downright stolen away from the true author? Which direction do you go in that?
I think it was deliberately. It was deliberately. The mix-up was deliberate. Yes. I think it has to do with Lord Burleigh's family. I think they didn't like their portrayals in the various Shakespeare plays. And also I think because of the succession, when King James did become the King of England, he was already the King of Scotland, but when he also became the King of England, of course, everybody at first, all the noblemen were very excited to have a new, king on the throne. But a couple of years after, 3-4 years after, they were kind of, I can't say they were turning against him, but they didn't really like him as much, and for various reasons. So it could be that he was a little paranoid, and, and he maybe was a little bit concerned about this prince, this quote-unquote prince, that maybe the power makers may want to, get rid of him and go for the prince, So I think you have this dynamic going on. So.
Well, I was talking to you before the show for a moment, and I was telling you that I was given a copy of The Great Cryptogram by Donnelly recently, and not making the connection until an absurd timing, I realized that this book that I had in my collection was really relevant to what we were talking about tonight, and I was really grateful to have this conversation, because when I was given this book, I was explaining that the Shakespearean mystery type was really one of the first documented conspiracies. And being a radio host in alternative radio since 2005, one of the things I have talked about a lot is conspiracies, whether they're political or otherwise. The conspiracy thing we think is kind of a modern day military-industrial complex thing. But when we look back at something like this and it gives us some context in history, we begin to realize that, let's go read the first one that was ever published. I'm sure it's not the first one that ever happened, obviously, but the first one that was ever really kind of put out there as an official conspiracy theory type book, and reading it and kind of fingering through it, because it's a big book, and looking through it, it really does give you some incredible things to think about and ponder on some of these things. And so it also hints at it being kind of like a secret book, like there was a encoded meaning into whoever Shakespeare was, his work, and as people were watching it, they were getting kind of opinions and comments and remarks on that timing, other things going on like social and political, which I'm sure would be, because most artists put in some kind of context like that into their work, whether it's obvious or not. It's usually an energy that's there. So being a woman and being so interested in this topic for 28 years, I'm curious how your intuition and your synchronicity guided you through some of this work. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I'm not an expert like that, but I do, believe that there are things like that. I have to say that once I was in an archive in England, and I was looking at a letter written by the Earl of Oxford, who I believe was real Shakespeare, and I kind of just put my finger on his signature, because I thought, oh my God, maybe I'm the first one to touch it after he wrote
amazing.
This 400 years ago.
Oh,
and
wow.
As I'm thinking that, I suddenly felt heat come through my finger.
Huh.
And, I'm not that imaginative that I would think that such a thing would happen. But it was funny. I subsequently read a book by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I forgot the title, but he mentioned the same thing. Of course, he was writing a fictional book, but I'm wondering if that's, a kind of a sign to, carry on and do what you're doing. But yeah, I've had a few experiences like that. I don't know if that was really your question. But.
Oh my gosh, of course that was my question. That was great. I mean, for someone like me, some of my listeners know this story. I went to Yale University in 2013 and had permission to handle the Voynich manuscript.
Oh,
Yeah, so I can totally relate to your story just now about touching the book and feeling some kind of energetic transfer, if you will. And so I've had firsthand experience with what you just explained to a different degree, different book, different meaning, but it changed my life.
Wow.
And, so when you just shared that, I said to myself, gosh, it's like she just explained almost like a paranormal type energetic transfer that I've heard other people describe in similar ways with other type artifacts. Yes.
That's
so
fantastic.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit if you've had some kind of soul calling to do this work. Nobody spends 28 years researching a mystery unless there's some kind of real heartfelt passion into it. And maybe that was kind of like a spirit way of connecting with you in this lifetime to help solve this mystery, to bring it to people, to do shows like this, to talk about it. Because when I first looked at the topic, I said Shakespeare. Well, are we going to be able to fill an hour and talk the Shakespeare stuff? Well, then when I started to really look through what you were presenting in your work, and I said, gosh, this is great. This is like the original conspiracy theory. I should call Alex Jones and say, hey, have her on the show and talk about how it relates to all of the stuff, But yeah.
Let me say that the Earl of Oxford, who I believe is the real author, he was, it was said by somebody that he tried to call up spirits. He was, I don't know if you've heard of Dr. D.
Yeah.
He was a well-known astrologer during that period, and he was associated with Dr. D. And also, if you look at the Shakespeare plays, there's ghosts in Hamlet and Richard III. And, there's witches in Macbeth. So he was into that as well.
So you're talking about John Dee, correct?
Yes, John Dee.
Well, John Dee, this is interesting because John Dee was one of the many people who actually held the Voynich manuscript for a period of time.
Oh, I don't believe.
John Dee's books just came out onto display in London on January 20th, which was the beginning of a 5-planet month-long alignment, which ends, I believe, on February 20th, somewhere around the 19th or 20th of this month. So it's interesting because when I was looking into John Dee and his relationship with the Queen and the astrology and what magic is in the Voynich manuscript, there was a kind of intuitive pull to really look deeper. So when you were talking about Shakespeare and the fact, I just think there's more going on. I mean, even just as a woman and sitting here in my curiosity and my intuition, and this is nothing against men. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just not one, so I don't know what it feels like for you. But for a woman to sit here and feel this, it's almost like a light bulb goes off and you say, well, there's got to be a reason why. So I can totally see how you got fascinated with all this. Now, the occult stuff, do you feel that this was an invocation to really, if he was into that belief system and he was doing the invocations and he was doing the practical magic, there's no way I can say pretty confidently that would be somewhere in the context of his work. Do you see the occult come out in a lot of his symbolism or the things that he talks about? Do you see that for yourself in your research?
Well, just when you look at the plays, you do see influence of ghosts and witches and like for example, Hamlet, he spoke supposedly to the ghost of his father, and the Earl of Oxford lost his father very young when he was 12 years old. So it kind of makes sense that he would, probably yearn for his father, but. Yeah, I can't say more than that,
Yeah. Well, maybe in yearning for his father, he was writing about a father-son relationship to kind of go into that a little bit and be some healing work there. So fast forward to 2016 here. Here you are in the middle of the world now. How does this work serve you in your everyday, practical, modern-day world? How has it changed your interaction with the rest of time, space here? I don't know how else to word that question. I'm sorry, it just kept coming out.
Well, I mean, the more I get into it, the more I learn, the more papers I have to write, the more books I have to write. It just keeps mushrooming bigger and bigger and bigger. And, yeah, I mean, I work in the jewelry business. I have a day job, but all of my other thoughts are on this and this man. And sometimes I talk to him. I own one of his portraits, and I feel very close to him. I don't know how else to answer the question. You have like a connection.
Do you believe in past lives?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe in past lives?
I think there's something to it, yes. I think it's possible.
Do you think that you're connected to this saga through a past life?
I think it's possible.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm wondering,
any hints or something in particular about different, clues that you may have felt more connected to in that sense throughout your years of looking through this?
No, I can't say it, but I do feel close to him. That's all I can say. I feel like I'm having a dialogue with him. Wow.
Well, I spent the night.
It has been guiding me a little bit, I feel.
I think so.
But you're a medium. Is that something that you could maybe tap into?
Well, what I thought of when I was asking you that question, I had spent time in Nikola Tesla's room at the Hotel New Yorker in New York City back in October of 2014, September. Actually, it was the end of September because it was over the last blood moon lunar eclipse of a 4 blood moon eclipse cycle. Yes. And I chose to spend it inside Nikola Tesla's room. I started 2 paintings inside the room. One of those paintings is here in my home in New York, and the other painting is in Ireland. And so I had this extraordinary experience in Nikola Tesla's room, and I really felt like I was connecting to him and having a dialogue with him, and it continued on into my dreaming. And when I came out the next day, I left, and I only spent one night there. I just had to do it. I was called to do it. I felt like I could have written an entire book on that experience, and it's still percolating. I haven't quite put that together because it's not time yet. But so when you were talking about I have a connection to him, I feel that he speaks to me. I really think that there's certain levels of consciousness and intellect that survive death and is able to come back in and play into our world, if you will, that we're in now, and interact in certain ways. So I don't think that the topic of paranormal interaction, or just like John Dee or Earl of Oxford, if they were, doing that esoteric occult type work, I mean, surely they believe that too. So if they put something into the sonnets or into the plays or something that was invoking that within a consciousness that was watching, it's really no different than watching a mega ritual happen on CNN, where they're using all kinds of symbolism and numbers and numerology and meaning to kind of brainwash mass minds at the same time with a perspective. So I think that you're doing really important work, and the context of it might seem like it's out of context for now, but I don't think it really is. I think it is in context. And the more you go back to these types of original conspiracies and read how people broke them down to kind of observe them, gives you a different perspective than what you might get online on the internet today. Somebody took the time to write a few thousand worth of pages here in this big thick book I'm sitting next to. And if you really take the time to read through the whole thing, you get a really interesting perspective on how to break down information. And we can then apply it to pretty much anything we want, whatever,
That's true.
grabs your attention, and you can go into it. And we have so many things and so much technology at our fingertips. We have a much easier time doing it than back in the 1800s or earlier, where people had to rely on different means of communication and connection than they do now. So That's a rant, by the way. Good job, Katherine.
Yeah, well, if all time is at once, then, he must be alive too,
Yeah, somewhere. I mean, we have all this
multi-dimensional universe. Some people say, yeah.
Well, I mean, they certainly believe that, some of the heart of esoteric material and, even paranormal, it has to do with the belief of what you see right out your eyes is not all that exists. And so once you accept that reality, you begin to perceive, again, information in a different perspective, which maybe after listening to tonight's show, everybody, you might have thought that this was going to be a boring show on Shakespeare, but hopefully it stirred some muse and inspired you to go out and take a look for yourself and maybe get a copy of Katherine's book and, do a little bit of looking on different multidimensional levels to see, well, here's a case study. This woman spent 28 years of her life and still continuing to speak for it. And she's owned her content of research and she's put it out there. And she's talking about it and sharing it, and as we share the conversation with others and people listen, that's how things spread. It's like it's almost like an infusion into your consciousness of truth. And if there is a spirit behind all of this that's helping Katherine do this journey and complete this work, then my goodness, it's certainly alive in this show. It's certainly alive in everybody who picks up anything to do with that. Or if you see something synchronistically, you're walking by a bookstore and there happens to be a Shakespeare, go buy it. Go buy it and read it because you just listened to this show and there might be something pulling you into the information. That's what I find in more modern day contexts when I'm watching an event happen. It's kind of that way. So it's like, let me get the attention of my curiosity, if you will, and see where that goes. And so...
Well, if anyone deserves to have the truth be revealed, it is the man who wrote the Shakespeare works, because they are such a phenomenal achievement. He not only created the most wonderful characters in the world, but he characters that live in us, like Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, and we speak his words daily, expressions he invented. And, for example, he created over 2,000 words. How many people can say that? We're speaking his language today.
Yeah.
And also the man himself in the sonnets, he lamented the fact that he would not be known. He knew it. If you read, like, for example, Sonnet 81 to the fair youth, and he says, "From hence your memory death cannot take, although in me each part will be forgotten. Your name from hence immortal life shall have, though I once gone to all the world must die." So that doesn't sound like he's very happy that he is probably going to be anonymous after his death, after all he achieved, writing almost 40 plays of the most incredible poetry and beautiful musical language, and no one will know him. And people who do know him, do know the real author, are going to get so much more out of reading the plays. They're going to come alive. So if you like Shakespeare already and you get a biography, like, for example, Shakespeare by Another Name by Mark Anderson, you read a biography of the Earl of Oxford, they're going to come alive for you too.
Well, something to think about for sure. So you have some new contributions to the Contested Year. Tell us about that.
Yes, Contested Year is a critique of a book by James Shapiro called The Year of Lear. And one of the main contributors of the work kind of started to read the Year of Lear, sorry, and he kind of came across several errors in some of his statements, and he thought, gee, he's a well-known English professor. Why is this work, not the top, for example? And so he just read through the rest, and he saw more and more. And so he said, let's critique this. So for each chapter, he gave it to several people who believe, like me, that the Earl of Oxford was the author and that Shakespeare was only his pen name. He was not the Stratford man. And so I was one of the people who contributed to critiquing a chapter. And, it's I don't feel good about having to critique, an English professor, but, they should be corrected if they're not saying, accurate or qualifying themselves in their statements.
Yes, they should. And bravo for you to speak up against that and to stand up and say, wait a minute, and perhaps that's part of your spirit and why you've been chosen in this quest to really, get this material in front of people's face and say, look at this.
Let's get the record straight for everybody. That's what it's all about. Let's get it straight. Let's not just go by, well, we think he may have done this, or it's probable that he wrote it this year. He did, that's really what most of the statements, can be like. And in some cases, the qualifiers are no longer used now. So, some statements are just made as if they are fact. And it's time to, look at that and say, well, hey, wait a minute, that's not exactly so. So that's what we wanted to do in this book.
What do you say to people who may be listening and putting this into context, modern time now, we fast forward to now, with their own work, their own body of work, their own content, they're a poet, or maybe they're an armchair researcher and they've put things together and they do this and they share stuff on Facebook and social media and they get it out, they have a YouTube channel and they're trying to do something about, where have you any comment on what it means to really own a large, or I don't even want to put a size to it, but to own content and to put your name on it and to, be responsible and accountable for the stuff that you put out there. We're about the end of the show, so I'd love to close on your thoughts to how people can better, to use this kind of example of what we've been talking about to better own their own content.
I'm not exactly clear how do you mean better?
If somebody were to write 40 plays today, we'd have lawyers and copyrights and, there would be a paper trail for sure. So I'm just curious, you have any advice for people who are maybe the struggling writer or, somebody who has written a book or, owning the content, put your name on it, own it, be accountable for it. If you use a pen name, I don't think anybody can get away with something like this nowadays because we're so connected and so digital. But anyway, I thought you might have something to say about that. And also the fact that 2016 is the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare, his death. So we have conferences planned, we have parties planned, we have celebrations, memorializing, and this is all
up to the wrong man.
Yeah.
That's the problem. But to answer your question, I would say yes. You have to really try and do your fact checking and make sure that you can back yourself up. I think that's for scholarly research. That's really essential, and I think that we need to. Everybody needs to do it.
Yeah,
not just
own your work. And for the people who struggle, there's some that struggle with that. Just get over it, own it. If you've created it, be proud of it. Do right by the things that you have done and created, and let people know. And it's not an ego thing anymore. I think it's more of this came from me, and that's my legacy of sorts. So. When everybody is thinking about the birthday party for Shakespeare this year, think about this show, come back and listen, share it with your friends, subscribe on my YouTube channel. There'll be more goodies coming out soon. Katherine, thank you so much for joining me tonight and sharing this great conversation. Do you have anything coming up that people can subscribe to, or, where can we find you, your book, all that?
Yes, well, I do have a website, but it got hacked recently. I don't know by who, but that should be up probably by the end of the week. So it's shakespearesuppressed.com, and you can read a little bit about my book, and also you can get it through Amazon.
Great. Well, we're out of time tonight. Thank you, Katherine, for being here again, and everybody for joining us and enjoying the conversation tonight. I look forward to next time. You're listening to Yin Radio TV. I'm your host, Hillary Raimo. Until then, namaste, everyone.